Hi, my name is Kate, and I love to read. Like, I was carrying books around with me before Kindles were a thing. So I decided to start a podcast where I interview the authors of some of my favorite books, ask them all of my questions so that I can read between the lines of the books. Welcome back to another episode of Between the Lines. I'm here today with Victor Manibo, who is the author of The Sleepless, which is a really fantastic sci-fi book that I read recently. So welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Kate. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So before we dive into the book, I did want to get to know a little bit about you. So when did you know that you wanted to write a book, or when did you know you wanted to be an author?
I think I've always been writing since I was a kid. It was something that I did as a hobby, though I didn't really take it seriously until I was an adult. As a
Mm-hmm.
kid, I'm Filipino. I was born of Asian parents who kind of valued the kind of job that brought you stability, and
Yes.
obviously writing is not it.
Yeah.
Um, so they encouraged me to go into the field that I'm in now, which is the law.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my father saying, once you get that degree and that law license, you can do whatever you want. And
Uh-huh.
and now that I have, I'm like, okay, now I'm gonna write. So I really started seriously writing a few years back, and
Uh-huh.
The Sleepless is actually one of the first things I wrote and the first novel that I finished.
Wow. That's like, it's so good. I wouldn't have expected that.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. So, what is your writing process like? So, do you outline? Do you kind of figure it out as you go? What's your structure?
With The Sleepless, it's a little different because I did that as part of the National Novel Writing Month. And
Oh,
for
yeah.
folks who don't know, it's a community, it's an online community that gathers every November to finish 50,000 words in 30 days. And that is a very intense requirement. It basically means you draft 1,700 words in every day for 30 days, which didn't allow. Yeah, no, it's a
Yeah.
lot. And
Yeah.
it didn't allow me to really plan or plot out anything. And
Okay.
it was also during a time that I was just trying to see if I could do it, right?
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
so with The Sleepless, I didn't really plan anything out, but in my next projects after that, I realized, okay, I need to outline, I need to be more specific about things before I write them down because otherwise I'm going to be revising over and over.
Yeah. That was who I was just talking to an author yesterday who said the same thing, where she was like, I love just like having it come to me as I'm writing, but I probably would have to do less revisions if I didn't do it that way. So that's funny that you both said that.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And I love revision. Revision is, there's also creativity there, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
creativity there. But at the same time, it's just a lot of, removing things that I really enjoyed, which is always heartbreaking for
Oh,
me.
yeah, right. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how you end up making those decisions. Do you, so what about your characters? Like in this book or your next book? Like, how do you get to know your characters?
With this book, for example, I think the plot came first. I knew the premise of A Sleepless World,
Mm-hmm.
and I saw it in my mind before I picked the characters with which to tell the story.
Okay.
Um, so because I started with a premise, I wanted to think of, well, what kind of character would best tell or would best portray this world? And I wanted
Mm-hmm.
someone who kind of was uneasy about his sleeplessness, who kind of maybe has some regrets about it, and also at the same time, someone who had a job or a role in society that allowed him to investigate things. Because
Yeah.
yeah, at the heart of it, I wanted it to be kind of a detective story. So I
Mm-hmm.
chose a journalist. I chose a journalist who was sleepless,
Mm-hmm.
and I chose someone who is queer and Filipino, just like me,
Mm-hmm.
because, like I said, it was my first novel that
Yeah.
that I really wanted to take seriously, and I just brought in everything that I knew, and I know how to be queer and Filipino, so that really helped.
I love that. The same author that I was just mentioning talked about how she thinks like it is write what you know and then amplify it. So like maybe it's not exactly the same thing, but you can connect to it. So I love that. That's so cool.
Yeah, no, 100%. It was definitely right what you know and just leaning into it and
Yeah.
obviously making some tweaks. Jamie is a lot similar to me, but he makes choices that kind of horrify me that I'm like, "No,
Right.
oh my God, stop."
That I love that. So it's definitely a sci-fi book in the near future. What do you think about sci-fi makes it such a perfect genre for speculative fiction or social commentary?
I think sci-fi really likes to ask big questions about how we
Mhm.
see ourselves in the future, right?
Yeah.
The setting and the time just kind of forces someone to confront their own visions for the future, or for a writer to examine their own visions of the future, and
Mhm.
you can't really talk about this is how things should be without examining how things are right now.
Yeah.
It's not just science fiction. Fantasy does the same thing. Like,
Mhm.
fantasy is not about the past. Science fiction is not about the future. It's always about the present.
Yeah.
But I think with science fiction, just because of the way that it's been, that the way that it developed, like with books like 1984 or Brave New
Mm.
World, those classic books,
Yeah.
they always lean toward the side of in your face about what they're trying to say in terms of social commentary. So
Yeah.
everything that followed kind of said to themselves, every writer was like, well, okay, I can be more explicit about these themes of social commentary in this genre.
Yeah.
I think we got a free pass because of our forebears who
Mhm.
started out, or who were the classics of the genre.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, for people who don't know what it's about, how would you describe The Sleepless in a couple sentences?
So the Sleepless is a sci-fi noir thriller set in a world where a part of the population does not require sleep, and it is a tale about capitalism and our drive for productivity, and how uh, time and memory and trauma and work can
Mhm.
really do a number on someone.
Yes, that really sums it up perfectly. Where did you get the idea for it?
The first time that I really thought of writing it came to me when I was riding on a train from my parents' place in New Jersey. I was coming from a long weekend, and I was having the Sunday scaries. I was looking forward to the work week and thinking, oh wow, I have so much to do, and I just spent all this time hanging out, and I just had this sense of, well, I guess I could finish everything if I didn't have to sleep, and
Yes.
from that it was like, okay, well, if I didn't have to sleep, what would that do to my body? And
Mm-hmm.
I asked more and more what if questions. Well, if I didn't need to sleep, what if like everybody didn't need to sleep? What would that do to the way we work, the way we live, the way we
Yeah.
build things, the way we structure our houses, for example? Um, and so it was just that sense of tiredness and exhaustion from being an
Yeah.
adult that made me think
Yes.
that made me think of the initial story seed, and it blew up from there.
That is so cool. I love that your answer is basically like adulting made me think of not having to sleep.
Uh, yeah, because it really does. You think about your work and balancing that with your family life, your
Mm-hmm.
personal life, your obligations to your partner, to your pets, and just like daily chores, taking care of yourself, like balancing all of that. I
Yes.
feel like gets harder and harder the more complex uh, society becomes, and the more complex our lives become.
Yeah. You said pets, and that was literally, I had to make sure I walked my dogs before this because otherwise they
Same.
would probably interrupt. So they're like sleeping, but I had to like wear them out so that I could fit this in still too and they
Great.
wouldn't bug us. So that's
Same.
funny.
I
Yeah.
walked my dog, and also now she's stuck in my bedroom because if not,
Oh.
she'll be jumping all over me.
Yeah, they sometimes they do. In my last podcast, Harley at the end came up and started like roaring at me, and I was like, okay, cool. I
Aw.
guess we're done. Yeah. So, next we are going to get into talking about the book. So, at this point, I always tell everyone if they haven't read it to pause and go read it and come back. But obviously, if you've already read it, you can keep listening. So, in some ways, the Sleepless storyline kind of isn't different from our present day, which you actually kind of pointed out earlier. So it really mimics our obsession with consuming and producing all the time. And so at the beginning of his sleeplessness, Jamie realizes I was consuming so much that after only a few months, I felt physically bloated. My brain was tired of all the media, and my lists felt like drudgery, like I had been masochistically giving myself unnecessary homework. So, what similarities do you see between our nonstop culture and the world of the sleepless?
Well, when I was writing those words, I was thinking specifically of media consumption as it relates to
Mm-hmm.
me, because I am the
Yeah.
kind of person who wants to be connected into what the cultural conversation is. So I need to
Yeah.
know, let's say, like right now, what's going on. You have so many big properties coming out with a lot of TV shows, and it's so hard to keep up, right? You
Yes.
have the Rings of Power, you have House of the Dragon, you have
Mm-hmm.
She-Hulk, and that's like
Yes.
Marvel, Lord of the Rings, and Game of Thrones all coming out with new shows in the same month. That's too much,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so it's
Yeah.
hard to catch up.
Yeah.
And
It really
so
is.
I felt that, and I felt like someone like Jamie would probably feel the same if that's the way that they were trying to fill up their time. They would feel
Mm-hmm.
like psychically bloated because, oh my god, I'm
Yeah.
consuming all these stories. And I love stories, but sometimes it does feel like I just need to not listen to anything, not watch anything, not read
Right.
anything, and kind of refill the well and rest. Um,
Yeah.
but the book itself also talks about consumption as a whole, not just like media consumption, but consumption of
Right.
resources, consumption of goods and services, and how
Mm-hmm.
when you are in a sleepless world, when you have a big part of the population who's always awake, they're always going to be consuming something. They're going to be consuming energy because their computers are going to be on 24/7 probably, right? Or they're going to be
Yeah.
consuming food because their bodies are going to need more fuel. They're going to be consuming
Yeah.
more things to live those 8 extra hours. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and what does that look like if 25% of the globe does that? Our
Yeah.
energy needs and our food needs are going to drastically change. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I think those are just important themes to think about, and not just you know obviously the initial thrust of the Sleepless was about hustle culture and the grind,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, what does the grind do? The grind tells us to keep working so that we can keep earning more money. So that
Yep.
what is the end goal here? And those are the kinds of questions that I wanted to raise.
Yeah. There were some really cool explorations of that where like limitless time made the pursuit of limitless money like even more possible, and it made it easier. Like it just accelerated everything basically.
And the question is
So
like, is that something that we want? Is that something that
yeah.
it as an individual, is that something that a reader would want for themselves, and is that
Yeah.
something that the reader would want for society at large? And I think those were the
Yeah.
questions that I really wanted to get to.
Yeah, you really did on multiple
And
fronts. You're welcome. One of the ways you did too was that you called it a pandemic of sleeplessness, and that the way it's received in the book kind of mirrors the way society handles new groups or outsiders sometimes. So you did have anti-sleepless groups developing that basically they advocated for the stringent monitoring of the sleepless and pushed for sleepless discrimination in housing, the workplace, all spheres of social and political life. So, were you using the reactions to sleeplessness as a way to discuss how parts of society treat outsiders, and then the way fear can like make the government overregulate people's lives?
oh yes, 100%. I
Yeah.
had to kind of think about how the world or how society would react if there was
Mm-hmm.
a new way to differentiate a group of people.
Yeah.
Humans have been differentiating people and discriminating against the other since
Mm-hmm.
since time immemorial, right?
Yeah.
It could be on the basis of sex or race or religion or ability, age, and
Mm-hmm.
these are just like so many axes that humans have kind of othered um,
Yeah.
other groups. And
Mm-hmm.
so with the Sleepless, I had to think about, well, this is a new kind of group of people. It kind of shares some similarities to, someone who might be disabled, right? Because it's about health,
Mm-hmm.
it's about the body, it's about how the sleepless bodies function differently from, most of society. So
Yeah.
there are similarities there, and I'm looking at how disabled people have been treated. Some there are like depending on the type of disability, be it mental or physical. Um, some people are treated as though they're a danger, or some people are treated as though they are special and need to be taken care of. And
Mm-hmm.
it's the government's job to regulate them and to be super paternalistic toward them. And you
Yeah.
know, there are different kinds of ways that people have um, exercised insidious discrimination. And those are things that I wanted to explore with the Sleepless. That's why I had all these kinds of different groups. Like, they have religious reasons, or they have, like,
Yeah.
they appear concerned but not really concerned. They're just like trying
Mm-hmm.
to hold people at an arm's length. And obviously, there
Yeah.
are people who are out and out haters, and they just dislike the Sleepless just because they're different. And there are many,
Right.
many like kind of gradations of discrimination and othering, and I wanted to show all of those.
Yeah. It definitely felt like like what you were saying, like religious, practical, like all of the different ways people approach it. Like it is what happens on any like hot topic issue today, even. I thought that was really cool. Um, so there's definitely upsides to being sleepless. And so the book does talk too about how artists flourished during the pandemic and after. So it says, didn't the extra time afford people more money, more freedom to pursue their creative endeavors? Literature, film, the visual and performing arts all blossomed despite the uncertainty and fears and chaos. So it made me wonder if you wrote this book amidst our real world pandemic restrictions. And do you feel like that extra time a lot of people had did allow some people to connect to passions that weren't just like the grind of work?
Well, to answer the logistical question, yes, I was working on
Yes.
this book during the pandemic.
Okay, cool.
I drafted it in late 2017, early 2018. So NaNoWriMo
Okay.
2017 to 2018, I was drafting it, and then I was revising it for a couple years.
Mm-hmm.
By the time that the COVID pandemic hit in March of 2020, I was revising it,
Mm-hmm.
and I was getting ready to send the manuscript out to agents, which is
Wow.
yeah, which is really interesting when you think about
Yeah.
how I'm gonna pitch this book. It's hard to pitch a
Mm-hmm.
pandemic related book during a pandemic. I'm
Right.
lucky that I found champions, my agent, and then the publishing house Heroon, who
Mm-hmm.
eventually bought the book. I'm lucky that they weren't phased by the fact that a pandemic is kind of a huge plot point in this story. But
Yeah.
yeah, I was working on it during the pandemic, and the section that you read is actually a
Yeah.
later addition, um,
Nice.
because I discovered, okay, this is what's going on while the COVID pandemic was happening. Like, people had basically extra time, right? We
Yeah.
were off work, for better or worse, because then some people didn't get to make money and
Right.
pay their bills and stuff. But at the same time, they had extra time, and what did some people do? Some people did turn to their hobbies, or they did turn to activities that somehow improve them in some way. Maybe they learned how to cook. We saw how many banana breads and just bread in general was like produced
Yes.
during that time. I know I cooked a lot, and I tried to improve my
Yes.
cooking skills.
Yeah.
And some people launched podcasts or wrote books.
Mm-hmm.
I know people who wrote books and had the time to write books during the pandemic.
Yeah.
So I thought about that and how, well, in the sleepless world, in this pandemic, people did have more time, and what would they do? They would probably do the same thing. And what would be the effect of
Yeah.
that? More books, more people who can, I don't know, be better at dance, for example, or sculpture, or
Yeah.
any form of art. Maybe more filmmakers, and that's what I was really going at. It was from the experience of seeing how some people reacted during the COVID pandemic, and putting that into the
Mm-hmm.
story.
Yeah. Actually, I keep mentioning other authors, but the author I talked to 2 episodes ago, she wrote her first one like entirely in the time that she was like home for the first few months, basically. So it is that stuff is cool when like some of us got a break from like whatever. But yeah, it was also frustrating if it meant you couldn't make money at the same time.
Yeah, and also I think
Um,
going into hobbies was a way of coping, right? There
yeah.
was this disaster that was going on, and you probably weren't making as much money as you used to. So there's like the financial strain, and also the public health threat, and the toll that that
Hmm.
takes to someone's mental health. And
Yeah.
where do we turn when things are bad? We turn to the things that really give us, joy and satisfaction. What we turn to our passions,
Yeah.
which are our hobbies. And for some people, they have tried to monetize that
Hmm.
because they had to, right? So those
Yeah.
were things that I was thinking about when I wrote this.
Yeah. So the book also does discuss the negative parts, the or negative ways the pandemic was handled. And it mentions at one point, but when you're dealing with a global pandemic, overcorrection is easy, maybe even necessary. So, 2 questions. Why do you think fear causes humans to overreact? And then, if it is maybe necessary, do you think overcorrection is then sometimes what like brings it back into balance?
I think overcorrection is always going to be bad. I mean, just anything in excess is bad. Um,
Right.
but when I was writing the specific part of the book, I was
Mm-hmm.
um, dealing with a situation where there were a lot of unknowns. I think at the time, this was during a flashback where um, governments and our institutions didn't know if sleeplessness could cause an early death or how
Mm-hmm.
contagious it is. They didn't know how it was transmitted. So their their means when you're confronted with something totally unknown, our reaction, or I think it's a normal human response, to just flee and
Mm-hmm.
isolate. Some people would fight, depending on what the source of the threat is. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not the kind of thing that encourages thoughtful deliberation, especially when it's a big global disease, which sleeplessness
Yeah.
was seen at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's really clamoring for, well, let's slow down and let's think about what the possibilities are, and let's investigate each one.
Yeah.
So, um, do I think it's good? Not necessarily, not the way it played out in the book, but I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a normal, or at least that's an expected response, especially with governments or dealing with large populations. With
Yeah.
the interesting part of this is with the way COVID has been handled. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know necessarily that there was an overcorrection or like an overreaction. In some
Yeah.
places, there's been an underreaction where um,
Yeah.
mask mandates are like on and off again and on again, depending on what I feel like isn't necessarily public safety concerns or the science, but other
Right.
considerations, right? So
Yeah.
so in some ways, that part of it is like not exactly tracking with our current experience with the pandemic, which is still
Right.
ongoing.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely is. So Jamie was also a workaholic before he became sleepless, but his lack of commitment to his personal life and his relationships definitely gets more pronounced after he becomes sleepless. And his therapist points out to him that he only noticed his memory lapses when it was stuff that was happening with work. and not in his personal life, which I also thought was just like a really good touch because I've gotten called out for that in therapy before.
Same, same.
That's awesome. So, did you kind of want to use him as an example of what happens when our priorities are like only about work or ourselves?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Like I was
Mm,
saying earlier, I needed my main character to be the real ideal way to tell the themes of the book. And one of the main themes is our
hmm.
culture, which values optimizing time and optimizing
Yep.
your participation in capitalism, your participation in the
Hmm.
workforce. And Jamie is that. And we see through his journey how he is dedicated to his job, and it's a job that has some social good, right? Because he is a
Yeah.
journalist. At least there is a public service in what he's trying to do, even though he's working for a private corporation. But
Hmm.
even with that kind of job, it's still a job, and it's still
Right.
something that should ideally be a part of one's life, not something that takes over someone's life
Hmm.
the way it does for his life, the way he's allowed it to take over his life to the detriment of his personal relationships. So, because I
Yeah.
wanted to explore those themes, Jamie definitely had to be that workaholic who, neglects
Yes.
things until the therapist calls him out.
Yes. Yeah. There was like kind of an ongoing joke with my therapist and both my husband and I, we actually work together too, and we're both
Uh
workaholics.
huh.
So there was like a joke for the first few years of therapy where she'd be like, "Okay, you've recapped me on your work and you've told me what you're doing in the future. What'd you guys do for fun?" And we'd be like, uh,
Yep.
work. It was fun.
Yeah. So
So it
relatable.
was like an ongoing joke.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I loved seeing that in the book. I was like, oh, that's familiar.
Right.
But by the at the end, Lochner tries to convince Jamie that he is figuring out a sleepless pill to give people the choice, basically. And Jamie says to him, it's a false choice. People want to be sleepless so they can live, so they can work their second, third, fourth job, so they get hired, so they get promoted, so they buy all the shit you make, the goods you sell, the services you provide. Everyone will choose to be sleepless because they can't afford not to be. And so it felt like you were discussing capitalism as a whole in that part. Do you think being born into a capitalistic society can feel like there's no choice to like plug into the system, make the money, and buy things?
I think it definitely indoctrinates us into this idea that this is the only system and that
Mm-hmm.
this is the best system that we can have. I mean, that's a recurring conversation every time there's something wrong happens with industry, with our corporations. Every time talk of regulation happens, or every time there's a new
Mm-hmm.
union that's being formed, people say, well, this is the capitalistic system. This is what we have, and it's the best that we can get. We've tried communism and it doesn't work. We've tried other economic
Mm-hmm.
systems and they don't work. So this is it. I definitely think that that's a narrative that is not true. Ursula Le
Mm-hmm.
Guin once had a quote, capitalism seems inescapable, but so did the divine right of kings at one point. Um, that's not a direct quote, but that was the idea. We, as
Yeah.
humans, have always lived in systems that we thought were unchangeable or unfixable, but they
Yeah.
weren't. And with the monarchy, with the fall of the monarchy, it took revolutions. With capitalism, for it to change, it might take that. It might take other ways of changing the system,
Mm-hmm.
but at least we have to start with the mindset of, well, things are changeable. It doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
when
I completely agree.
when Jamie was talking to Lochner about this, there was a sense of a little bit of hopelessness, or at least a little bit of recognizing that this is how society is. That if given
Yeah.
the choice, they would want to participate in capitalism. They would uphold the
Yeah.
inequalities and the demands of capitalism. They would give in to the demands of capitalism. That's what
Right.
Jamie's saying here, and I think that comes from his experience as well. I did have that choice. I did take that pill, and how
Uh-huh.
this is how I did things, and I think this is how others would do it too. The only reason that
Yeah.
Jamie has kind of a heel turn is because he found out about all the corruption, all the scheming that are done by all these
Hmm.
parties, and also because of his
Yes.
memory loss and his trauma. But not everyone will have
Yep.
those things happen to them. Not everyone will experience that. And
Hmm.
and Jamie, if you know, he probably sees that if somebody who had an easier life and like didn't know as much, and they were given the choice,
Yeah.
they would probably take it, and more people would probably
Yeah.
take it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even just because, like, if more and more people were doing it, you'd feel like you had to even just like be able to keep up like with what's you would feel like all of society would be shifting anyway. So it's like, don't you need to do that to like not even compete, even just like stay at the same
Right,
level?
100%.
Yeah. So, if there weren't memory destroying effects, though, or any negative side effects, would you choose to be sleepless?
Ooh, okay, so I can't tell you how many times I've been asked this. My answer always is, you know, uh, I my relationship with sleep is I do it because I need to do it. I don't I'm not a napper. I don't crave sleep, but I need sleep.
Yeah.
So if there were no memory effects, I would probably choose to be sleepless. But
Yeah.
I also know that I would get so bored, or like
Yeah.
I would be like, okay, now what do I do? I would be good at telling myself to take care of myself and not just work. I don't think I would be a workaholic, but
Yeah.
I would definitely have those nights when I'm like, okay, what do I do now? I'm just like twiddling my fingers and killing like 3 4
Yeah.
hours. I don't know. So yes, the short
Yeah.
answer is yes, but I won't be a hundred
Yeah.
percent happy about it.
Right. I think I loved your point in the book about how like it's almost like better than living longer when you're older, like you get to like have extra life but when you're still younger. And I was like, yes, that is what is so appealing about it. And I feel like my to read list is so long that I would literally never be bored.
Yeah, no, same. I would read a lot. I would read a lot. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And like probably just talk to more readers. That has been like the best part about like connecting with people for the podcast is like the more books you've read, the more people you can talk to about them.
Yeah, and also that's one of the best parts about having written a book. More people want to talk to you about it, and you can just like
Yeah.
jam about not just the book, but books in
Yeah.
general and other authors. It's been
Hmm.
a great experience so far.
That's so cool. So, where can people find you to follow you, keep up with everything you're doing?
People can find me at Victor Manibo. That's at sign and then my name on Instagram,
Hmm.
Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook. I luckily got the same
Nice.
handle because I have a fairly unique name. And they can
Yeah.
also check out victormanibo.com for my website and my
Okay.
upcoming events. Most of the time, I'm on Instagram and Twitter. And please feel
Yeah.
free to message me there or like DM me. I always like talking to readers and other writers and just book lovers in general.